What if the emptiness you feel isn't a flaw in you, but evidence of a psychological framework deliberately erased from your awareness? Why modern society keeps you disconnected from your inner power structure? There's something unsettling happening beneath the surface of modern life. You scroll, you work, you achieve milestones that should feel meaningful. Yet something fundamental remains hollow. This isn't ordinary dissatisfaction. This is the signature of systematic disconnection, a severing of access to psychological forces that should be fully operational within you. Despite unprecedented technological advancement and endless self-improvement content, anxiety disorders are skyrocketing. Depression rates continue climbing. Millions report feeling inadequate regardless of what they accomplish. The question nobody's asking is why validation never sticks, why achievement never satisfies, why external success leaves internal emptiness untouched. The answer isn't more productivity hacks or better mindset content. It's recognizing that you've been conditioned to ignore an entire psychological operating system that's always been available. There exists an ancient framework, a complete map of human consciousness that was systematically suppressed, demonized, and removed from mainstream knowledge. This framework isn't religion. It's not belief. It's a symbolic language describing archetypal forces present in every human being regardless of background or faith. These forces are called Orishas in Candomblé, but their nature transcends any specific tradition. They represent fundamental aspects of the psyche: willpower, self-worth, emotional resilience, strategic thinking, transformation, protective boundaries. Here's what almost no one notices. These forces weren't just forgotten, they were actively erased. For centuries, knowledge systems that empowered individuals to access their own psychological depth were labeled primitive, dangerous, evil. Candomblé, along with other indigenous and African traditions, was criminalized, persecuted, transformed into a synonym for ignorance. This wasn't accidental, it was strategic. Because when you remove from human beings the map connecting them to their own internal power, you create permanent dependence on external validation, on authorities, on imposed narratives, on consumption as identity. And this opens a door few dare to walk through. If these psychological forces exist within you, and if they were deliberately concealed, then the void you experience isn't your failure. It's the result of systematic cultural erasure. You're not broken. You're disconnected from an internal system you were never taught to access. The Orisha Matrix isn't spiritual fantasy. It's a complete psychological framework, a structure mapping behaviors, emotions, challenges, and human potentials through specific archetypes. And when you learn to recognize these patterns, something shifts. You stop being hostage to external narratives and start operating from internal clarity. If this kind of investigation resonates, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. How archetypal forces function as psychological operating systems. Most people have never encountered Candomblé outside superficial stereotypes or distorted media representations. But what lies beneath this tradition isn't vague mysticism. It's applied psychology disguised as spirituality. The Orishas aren't external entities waiting for worship. They're symbolic representations of forces already existing within you. Ogun, for instance, isn't just a mythological warrior. Ogun is the archetype of relentless discipline, focused action, the capacity to forge pathways where none exist. He represents the part of your psyche that refuses to quit, that transforms obstacles into opportunities through absolute determination. When you understand Ogun, you don't need to believe in him. You need to recognize this force within yourself and learn to activate it consciously. Oshun provides another powerful example. She's not just romanticized beauty and femininity. Oshun is the archetype of abundance, healthy self-esteem, the ability to recognize your own value without needing external approval. She teaches that prosperity doesn't come from self-destructive sacrifice, but from internal alignment with your own worthiness. How many people destroy their mental health chasing success because they were never taught to access the Oshun principle within them? How many remain trapped in cycles of self-devaluation because this force was erased from their consciousness? Yemoja represents deep emotional nourishment, the capacity to offer and receive care without self-annihilation. Shango symbolizes justice, balance, the ability to establish clear boundaries without guilt. Each Orisha maps an essential psychological function. Together, they form a complete matrix, an integrated system describing the totality of human experience. But here's where it gets unsettling. This system was deliberately removed from dominant Western knowledge. When European colonizers encountered African traditions, they didn't see knowledge. They saw threat. Because people who understand their own deep psychology, who operate from integrated internal archetypes, aren't easily controlled by external narratives. So these traditions were demonized. Literally, they were associated with evil, with the primitive, with danger. Candomblé was criminalized in Brazil until the mid-20th century. Practitioners were persecuted, imprisoned, ridiculed. Their symbols were transformed into synonyms for ignorance. And why? Because knowledge that empowers is always suppressed by systems dependent on obedience. Drop a comment if you've ever felt this disconnection without understanding why. What happens when internal power gets replaced with external dependence? The suppression of occult knowledge was never just historical. It's structural, ongoing, and visible. While traditions like Candomblé were being openly criminalized, something more subtle happened simultaneously: the replacement of internal power systems with external dependencies. Modern society doesn't teach you to access archetypal forces within yourself. It teaches you to consume manufactured solutions for invented problems. Feel inadequate? Buy a course. Feel empty? Buy an experience. Feel lost? Follow an influencer. The entire system functions because you were trained to believe your answer is always outside you. But that's not true. And deep down, you've always known. The Orisha Matrix represents exactly the opposite of this logic. It affirms that you already possess, internally, all the forces necessary to navigate challenges, overcome limitations, and build a life aligned with your essence. You don't need to purchase Ogun. You need to recognize him. You don't need to worship Oshun. You need to activate her. These forces aren't external. They're aspects of your own unconscious, waiting for conscious integration. And when you integrate archetypes instead of repressing or ignoring them, your psychology changes. You stop operating in reactive, anxious, fragmented mode. You start operating in conscious, centered, powerful mode. Only there's a detail almost nobody perceives. The system doesn't want this. A population accessing internal power doesn't consume as much, doesn't obey as easily, doesn't accept imposed narratives without question. That's why knowledge like the Orisha Matrix was replaced with superficial self-help psychology, commercialized spirituality, empty promises of quick transformation. You're encouraged to seek healing, but never taught to access the source. You're encouraged to seek power, but never shown it already exists within you. And here's what gets most unsettling. This suppression doesn't happen through direct prohibition. It happens through cultural delegitimization. Candomblé is presented as folklore, as exotic belief, as interesting but irrelevant tradition for modern life. Its symbols are reduced to aesthetics, its practices to anthropological curiosity. The system allows you to know these things exist, as long as you never take them seriously as actual tools for psychological transformation. And meanwhile, millions remain disconnected from internal forces that could completely change their relationship with fear, scarcity, insecurity, and external control. If this content is helping you see hidden patterns, hit the like button. It helps the channel continue these investigations. How to consciously activate internal archetypes to transform modern challenges. Understanding the Orisha Matrix theoretically changes nothing. Knowledge without application is entertainment. But when you learn to work consciously with these archetypes, transformation is tangible, real. This doesn't require ritual, doesn't require religious belief. It requires attention, intention, and symbolic practice. Working with Ogun, for example, means recognizing when you need relentless discipline and focused action. It means identifying the obstacle in front of you and asking, what would Ogun do? Not as external entity, but as internal force. Ogun doesn't hesitate. Ogun doesn't wait for permission. Ogun acts with absolute clarity. When you channel this principle consciously, your capacity for execution shifts. Working with Oshun means confronting your relationship with worthiness. How many opportunities have you sabotaged because, deep down, you didn't believe you deserved them? How many times have you accepted less because your self-esteem was conditioned by external narratives? Oshun doesn't ask for validation. Oshun recognizes intrinsic value. She teaches that abundance isn't reward for suffering, but natural consequence of internal alignment. When you activate this archetype, you stop operating from scarcity and start operating from fullness. And this isn't empty positive thinking. It's deep psychological reconfiguration. Yemoja offers another kind of power, the capacity to nurture without self-annihilation. How many people destroy their emotional health trying to save everyone? How many confuse care with self-sacrifice? Yemoja is conscious nourishment, not codependency. She teaches you can offer support without losing your own centrality, that you can be generous without becoming invisible, that you can love without dissolving. When you integrate this principle, toxic relationships lose their foundation, because you stop operating from need and start operating from choice. And this opens a door few walk through, the perception that modern challenges aren't new. Anxiety is fear without clarity, a disconnection from Ogun. Chronic financial insecurity is disconnection from Oshun. Emotional burnout is disconnection from Yemoja. Repeated injustices in life are disconnection from Shango. The Orisha Matrix doesn't solve problems magically. It offers clarity about which internal forces you need to activate to navigate these problems consciously. And when you do this, something shifts. You stop being victim of circumstances and become agent of your own transformation, not because you found the perfect solution, but because you reconnected with forces that were always available, waiting for you to stop searching outside for what already existed inside. What becomes possible when you reclaim the complete map of your own psychology? Imagine a version of you that doesn't depend on external validation to know your value, that doesn't wait for permission to act, that doesn't sacrifice your essence to be accepted, that doesn't operate from fear disguised as prudence. This version isn't fantasy. It's the natural result of consciously integrating the archetypes composing the Orisha Matrix. When you reconnect with Ogun, you act. When you reconnect with Oshun, you prosper. When you reconnect with Yemoja, you nurture without losing yourself. When you reconnect with Shango, you establish boundaries with clarity. Each activated force changes not just how you think, but how you exist in the world. And what's most powerful about this isn't individual, it's collective. Because when one person awakens to their own internal power, they stop feeding systems dependent on their unconsciousness. They stop accepting narratives that diminish them. They stop consuming false solutions to invented problems. They stop validating structures keeping them fragmented. And when thousands, millions do this simultaneously, the entire system destabilizes, not through violent revolution, but through conscious non-participation, through silent withdrawal of energy from everything that doesn't resonate with their integrated essence. This terrifies those dependent on control. That's why knowledge like the Orisha Matrix was suppressed. That's why ancestral traditions were demonized. That's why authentic spirituality was replaced with superficial spiritual consumption. Because a human being connected with internal archetypal forces isn't manipulable by external narratives. They don't need a guru, don't need a savior, don't need permission. They operate from internal clarity, and that's threatening to any system based on dependence. But here's the final truth. You don't need to believe any of this to test it. You just need to observe. Observe the patterns. Observe where you operate from fear, scarcity, insecurity, need for approval. Then observe which archetypal forces are absent in those areas. Is Ogun active when you need to act? Is Oshun active when you need to recognize your value? Is Yemoja active when you need to care without self-annulling? If they're not, it's not because you're weak. It's because you were never taught to access them. The Orisha Matrix offers that map. And when you learn to read it, something irreversible happens. You realize you were never alone. You realize you were never without power. You realize the prison was always invisible, constructed from narratives you accepted as truth. If this video opened your perception, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Comment. Which archetype resonated most with you right now in your life?